Hello, fellow Guardians. I hope you've been enjoying your Season of the Deep as much as I have. Well, there's not a whole lot to do for the season just yet. I did find one thing interesting. It was buffed to a certain aspect on Gunslinger that really caught my attention, and I hope you guys sit back, relax, and let's enjoy some ignitions together. First up, for our exotic of choice, that's going to be young Aramkara's Spine. With the nerfing of Starfire Protocol, I thought to myself, hey, this is still in the game. Sure, it's not the double exploding fusion grenades that used to exist once upon a time, but man, you throw just about as many grenades on just as short a cooldown. So, we can pretty much use this for ad clear, boss damage. It's the gift that keeps on giving. The reason is because ability damage is going to generate grenade energy for our trip mines. Keep that in mind because that's going to be important for the entire build. So for our subclass setup, or at least what I have put together, feel free to modify this as you so choose. First up for the dodge and the class ability, it's going to be Marksman's Dodge, which is going to refresh our melee ability anytime that we are next to an enemy. This is pretty important, as if we ever mess up the gameplay loop, the Marksman Dodge will always have our back. Then we're going to have Fan of Knives. This is an interesting choice, and while it doesn't necessarily do the most damage out of all of the melee options for Solar Hunter, the Fan of Knives, or Knife Trick, notably has a unique interaction. When you activate your melee, you'll throw 3 little knives, 1, 2, 3, and if they all connect with 2 different targets, you're going to get your grenade energy all the way back. Next up for the jump, this one should be easy for every hunter main out there, triple jump. If you use anything else, I think there's something wrong with you. Lastly, the grenade. According to our exotic, we do have to run the trip mine grenades, so really, that's our only choice here. So, moving on to our aspects, we're going to lead off with Knock 'em Down. This aspect shouldn't be a surprise, as it's going to make our super deal more damage. In this case, I have on Blade Barrage because it's a really nice one-and-done super that does bonkers amount of damage. Why? Anyway, after complaining about how much damage Hunter supers do, this aspect, that's really all we're going to be getting out of it, plus 2 additional fragment slots, so really no complaining there. Moving on, we're going to have our second aspect, Gunpowder Gamble, which is actually the spicy part of this build, is if we get 6 solar kills in any way, be it Scorch, Ignition, with our solar weapon, grenade, melee, anything that deals solar damage, we're going to get an improvised solar explosion that immediately causes an ignition. This is a ton of fun, especially as the grenade has a really slow flight time, meaning that you can toss it and shoot it midair to cause a huge ignition like this. Moving on to the fragments, we'll first up have the Ember of Torches. The Ember of Torches is super incredible and one of the keyholes of the build, as because of its interaction with Knock 'em Down, the Ember of Torches will give us infinite melee ability. This works because Ember of Torches, whenever we make a melee attack against an enemy, we become Radiant. Getting a kill like this, as we are Radiant, will refresh our melee. If you watch the gameplay during the time, there shouldn't really be a moment, unless I don't get a kill, where I don't have my melee available. This will also feed into our exotic, Aramkara's Spine, as dealing a lot of melee damage repeatedly is always going to charge our trip mine. With the new addition of the Ember of Resolve, this fragment states that Solar Grenade Final Blows will cure you. This is a newer one with Lightfall, but the interesting part about it is because we have so many trip mines in Gunpowder Gamble, which is an ignition grenade, we're almost always going to be constantly getting cured because of this fragment. Next up, we do have kind of a spicy fragment with the Ember of Eruption. Not only does it give plus 10 strength, but this fragment makes our Gunpowder Gamble have an increased area of effect, plus any other ignition that we make along the way, so exactly what we want. Last but not least, we have the Ember of Singeing, which notably is going to give us class ability energy anytime we scorch targets. And, well, with the infinite melee, grenade, and even Gunpowder Gamble, I would say that we do a little bit of scorching, and this one just helps keep the gameplay loop just in case we ever miss a kill with the knives. Alright, now for the mods. First up, stats. Obviously 100 resilience, because that stat, even at 30%, I find is still pretty busted. And then I like to spec into discipline, but ultimately anything after that is your choice. I do recommend pretty high mobility as well. Next, hands-on. Great mod as we're constantly getting melee kills, so that'll always be helpful. Harmonic Siphon will always just make orbs of power whenever we get rapid solar weapon final blows, which you definitely should be using in this build. Heavy ammo finder, just because I like that little bit of extra heavy. Firepower in the arms, along with a heavy-handed because we're doing so much grenade and melee, along with a bolstering detonation, which just gives class ability energy anytime we use a grenade, which we throw a few of them, so that shouldn't be too big of a concern. In the chest, it's not super concerning, just throw on whatever resist or reserve mods might be relevant to you. In the legs, we do have a recuperation and a double weapon surge, according to what you want. Boss damage, ad clear, anything that you need at the moment, just go ahead and change that around. Next up, we do have a time dilation to synergize with our surge mods. Then bomber, so every time we dodge, we'll get some grenade ability cooldown, which is nice. It's there. Lastly, we do have a new mod, Powerful Attraction. So, anytime that we dodge, which also resets our melee ability, we'll pick up Orbs of Power when nearby. This is notably very helpful for A, Super Generation, and B, the Recuperation mod. Anytime you get scared, just dodge, and I promise you'll accidentally pick up some orbs. As for weapons, the one thing that I really recommend is a weapon with Incandescent on it. As for what it does or what type of ammo it uses, not really a huge deal across the board, but one thing that I will and can say is that I do love the Callus Mini tool for a build like this. If you don't have access to one, there are plenty of other options, and I'm going to do this in one take, so wish me luck. The Imperial Decree, the Amit AR2, the Tyranny of Heaven, the Epological Integration, the Jurassic Green, the Crime Mutiny, the Fixed Odds, the Royal Executioner, the Judgment of Kelgaroth, Zahuli's Bane, Briar's Contempt, the Briar's Contempt but this time Adept, the Fixed Odds, the BXR-55 Battler, the Apex Predator, the Trusty, the Ikelos SG 1.0.3, Without Remorse, Drang, Beloved, the Ikelos Sniper Rifle V1.0.3, the Callus Mini... Woo! One take. The Callus Mini Tool, the Caretaker, Throne Cleaver, Asaya's Dejection, Acacia? I don't know how to pronounce the name of that trace rifle. The Adept version of the Dejection, Retraced Path, and Jurassic Green, so you really do have a few options out there, and man, one taking's a lot harder than I thought it would be. Now, with all of the boring and analytical stuff out of the way, I feel like I have some time here to talk about how I feel about this build. This build is actually really fun, it's great for ad clear, and notably not bad for boss damage either. I'm going to put a really horrible boss rotation onto the screen. Some of you might cringe. I was cringing watching this back, but frankly, I just don't want to go get better damage at the Ogre. Anyway, this is the Ogre in Grasp of Avarice. I have a fire team mate who's just throwing me down a well so I can focus on doing a really poor DPS rotation. And some notes, while I don't think the damage was too bad, obviously I am using a hothead with Demolitionist, which is another key part. I really think you should be using a rocket with Demolitionist in this build, because if you are doing that, you get so many grenades repeatedly on boss damage that oftentimes you really can just spam grenades, and 1.4 million isn't that bad. Also, with some thoughts on the build, one thing that I do believe I should mention is that any single time that you can't just get a melee kill on say a larger elite enemy, what you can do is you can throw your knives, which apply Scorch, and then your Trip Mine. This should cause an ignition, and because the initial Scorch was done by your melee ability, the ignition counts as melee damage. This should not only fully refund your melee energy with Knock 'em Down and the Ember of Torches, wow, memory's not very good, and it should also finish off your grenade energy. These two in tandem take down pretty much any large enemy you could ever need to. That's not a boss, of course. Other than that, I do find this build to be really fun. You get a lot of Scorch, a lot of ignition. Gunpowder Gamble is an absolute riot. You just toss the grenade, wait until it's over a huge group of enemies, and then you go boom. Really, nothing else in the game feels like Gunpowder Gamble, and I'm really glad it got buffed to 2 fragments over the 1. I've always found it really fun, just hard to use, because back in the day, well, when Seasonal Haunted, god, wow, that's already back in the day, huh? Last year, Witch Queen. Wow. Time flies when you're having fun. Anyway, when it was at 1 fragment, it couldn't really compete with the other hunter aspect, and with this buff, I feel like it's come a long way and will continue to go a really long way in being one of my favorite aspects in the entire game. Anyway, these are my closing thoughts for the build. I do think that it has a lot of pros. It's really fun. You get to press all of your buttons virtually all the time. Your grenade, your dodge, your melee. None of those are really ever on cooldown for very long, and that's one thing I do enjoy. For me, it is a little bit glass cannony because I do love to play like an absolute goofball, which is why I really should be making some Titan builds. Anyway, with a little bit of precision and a little bit of accuracy, that tripmine grenade does a ton of work. The fan of knives will constantly give you almost all of your ability back all the time. And I do have to say, spamming all of your buttons is something that's one of my favorite activities in Destiny. If you're looking for an active build that's always going to make you think on your toes and constantly have to reposition and focus on movement where enemies are and not die to just being a glass cannon, then I think that this is a build for you. And hey, now that we're at the end, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. It motivates me to put out even more content, I guess, at this point. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and you all have a wonderful rest of your day, night, or evening.